Okay, hello everyone. How are y'all doing? Good. I'm good. Thank you. You know what? I love a lively set of people. Sometimes you say, "How are you?" and it's just crickets, quiet. Well, I'm Bree, and I am so happy to present Code But Make It Cute today. And we're going to talk all about coding for the sake of art, passion, and creativity, but not just because it's fun, but also because it actually makes you a better developer and a better engineer. So picture this, close your eyes for a second and think back. You are a kid on the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you have just figured out how to make the internet your own. And for a lot of us, whose first dive into web customization was MySpace or something similar? Perfect. I love to see it. So, for some of us, like me, maybe you got home from school, and I totally should not have had a MySpace in the seventh grade. We're not going to talk about that though. But you get home from school, you log on to MySpace, and the first thing that you do is you change your top eight, you change your bio, you change all of the things to represent how your day went and what your standing is currently with all of your friends. The only thing that changed more than my top eight was probably the lines of code that I was using to add sparkles, add cute things, butterflies to my profile. Or maybe you were more into gaming, also like I was. Has anybody played The Sims? Any version of The Sims? Perfect. So then you know a lot of the game is about modding and customization. That's how you really get to make it your own. Originally, I wanted to start with having my own custom clothes and things to make it cute. But then I was like, wait, I can customize the game functionality completely. I can have my own meshes. I can really make this my own. And also, I think there needs to be a dive into the Sims to developer pipeline because there definitely is one there. Or maybe you were a Neopets or a Tumblr or a Roblox kid. It doesn't matter what your gateway was. The thing that is similar is we started out with curiosity. We did not start these journeys into customization because we had big, high dreams of becoming developers or engineers. We just wanted to make something that was unique and that represented all of us uniquely. So, what we didn't know at the time was that curiosity and that creativity was actually our first lesson in development. But something happened along the way. Sometimes we grow up, sometimes we have to start developing to corporate guidelines. It happens here and there. And when was the last time anybody has coded something for fun?
Uh, I'm actively playing a game called Screeps, which is a game where you have to basically create an army where you drive it with your code.
Mm-hmm.
So you write like pathing routes and like different orders of responsibility for everything.
I love it. And you played that recently, you said?
Yeah.
Perfect. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm working on a personal project and I have to like write code to make it work.
Okay. Awesome. Absolutely. I love that we're coding for fun. I think sometimes after we learn how to code and get into it, there's a point where maybe that creativity and will to code on our own outside of work starts to dip. But I love to hear that we are coding outside of work, even in ways that are like gamified and really fun. So for some of us, it meant turning to best practices, chasing frameworks, and going towards corporate guidelines versus coding the things that we really wanted to. And when we think about creativity, sometimes we think about aesthetics or purely how it looks, but it is truly a developer skill. So it's a muscle that we have to really hone in on. And it's something that we use in ways that you might not necessarily think about. So you have to be really creative when the docs that you're trying to use are really vague and actually contain nothing that you need, or when the bug that you're trying to fix is really elusive and you really can't figure it out. All of those things as developers require us to use different forms of creativity. So creativity helps us sharpen our, bless you, pattern recognition. It helps us to be able to find those reusable patterns a lot faster. It strengthens our debugging because when things are broken, we are more likely to start experimenting because it's already broken and there is no consequence to breaking it even further. And we also improve our communication because we are better at explaining ideas that don't yet exist. And most importantly, being creative as a coder builds resistance. So we as creative coders are adaptable and we improvise. That is just naturally what we do because nothing in this industry will ever stay the same. And we see these constraints not necessarily as blockers, but more so as design constraints that are going to get us from one point to another. So the more that we flex that muscle, we get to be more intuitive, more resourceful, and naturally more collaborative, both with ourselves and also with our coworkers. So let's talk about some of the ways that we can keep some of this creative energy flowing. And I'm going to take you through a couple of projects that I've done recently that have sort of helped me with this. So the first one is this CSS pixel art. Now, this comes from CSS Battle. I did not come up with the idea for this on my own, but the key here is that you don't always need really fancy tools in order to create something that is nice or that's fun. So this is basically created with one single div, as you can see here. And what happens is it is just one div that is creating pixels off of a box shadow inside of a grid format. So this was a challenge because there was no JavaScript that was really needed. And the goal with CSS Battle is to figure out how you can do it in as little code as possible because it's a code golfing game. So once I came up with the original solution, which was a bunch of divs, I figured there had to be a way better option to do it. And then once I started looking into how you can use and manipulate box shadows, this is not an example of something you would see if you search, how do I use a box shadow? But it shows how inventive you can get when you take away the normal constraints of what you should or shouldn't be using a CSS property for. And then once I got a little bit comfortable with CSS battles, I started to think, hey, I'm seeing a lot of CSS artists that are taking real life things and they're creating them in CSS and HTML, which was absolutely mind boggling to me. And I will say I am nowhere near where they are just yet. But what I did was look around and I wanted to see what was something that I could try to create. And what I ended up creating was this Nintendo Switch. So this is created with HTML and CSS alone. And what it really taught me how to do was break down a solution or break down a problem into the smallest parts that I could in order to build up a solution. So this was a really big challenge at first because I couldn't figure out how I was going to put all of the pieces together. But then I changed the problem to, well, what is the smallest piece that I can do? And it started with buttons, which are basically just singular divs that are rounded with a border radius. Then once you put the buttons together, how can I create the Joy-Con? How can I create the curving of each individual one? How do I create the screen, or what does that part look like? And then before you know it, once you put all of those little parts together, you have something that looks like this. But what do projects like pixel art or the Nintendo Switch that I created actually teach us about practical business application for creativity? So companies balance joy and practicality in order to transform experiences that we see every single day. So you never want to experience an internet connectivity issue when it comes to Google Chrome. However, if you do, you will find this fun, cute little T-Rex game that they have created and implemented. And this was something that was created by the Google Chrome team in 2014. And the reason that it's a T-Rex is purely a joke and a nod to the fact that having no internet basically would take us back to the prehistoric ages. Or another example, you go to a website and maybe you get a bad or broken link and it takes you to a 404 page. Coming across a stylized 404 like one of these here versus a simple generic browser 404 really can have a lasting impact on your customer's impression of you and your brand. So creative intention is what makes your brand not only thoughtful, but it makes it appear more human. If you come across one of these, sure, you're going to be a little spicy because you didn't get the link, but you're also going to stop and maybe say, wow, or be a little bit blown away by some of these 404 pages. And that is the whole point. You're getting an error, but it's on brand. It doesn't take you 100% out of what you're looking for. So when working with CSS, it's all about creative constraints, but sometimes you have to break out of that box and add or explore extra dimension. So let's check out one extra dimension to some of the 2D art that we've looked at and take it to 3D. So after spending time with my 2D Nintendo Switch, I wanted to figure out how could I add extra dimension to it or make it more 3D, make it real tangible. And that's where I came up with React 3 Fiber. And that is basically a React renderer for 3JS, which is the 3D modeling engine. And this is basically, it needs a little work, so don't laugh. But this is basically a switch that is created all with JavaScript and React components. So everything that you see here, the lights, the objects, the buttons, all of the physics and everything that would go into it is all React and something that a web developer would know and be comfortable with. So we've really gone from 2D pixel art to adding dimension with shadows and CSS to now a whole nother level with 3D and React. But this actually shows up in a lot more places that you would think. Yes, maybe people are not doing Nintendo Switches, but we have Nike who is using their swoosh and their 3D models in order to create interesting customer experiences who are going to purchase. We have anatomy and engineering where you can teach anatomy, engineering concepts, or physics or chemistry, whatever it is, using these 3D models where you can actually see and be immersed in what you're learning. And then we have something that a lot of us are probably familiar with to an extent, which is these 3D renderings of hotels, museums, anywhere. And these are great. Why? How many times do you go to a website and you see a hotel or you see an apartment maybe? If you see a 3D rendering, that is going to give you a better idea of if that place is going to be for you or not, versus you having to waste the time, get the appointment, go down to view. You easily self-select and figure out, I want this or I don't want this. So I think these are things that we have come to sort of like take for granted in our everyday life. And there are so many experiences that we have now that are just like this and natural conveniences. And these are built with things like 3JS, which is the same framework that I used for my Nintendo Switch. So maybe we're not using them for pure just fun things, but there are tons of creative ways to use them in everyday life. So libraries like 3Globe and DeckGL use 3JS to create experiences like these. And what this really teaches us not only is about creativity, it also teaches us how to think in scenes and how to think in hierarchies. And it forces us to be really intentional about composition and performance, especially with something like this that's going to run in the browser. You can't always assume that everybody's machine is as high powered as yours. So if you want them to have a good experience, there has to be a very good attention to detail to performance as well. So we've done a lot with 2D and 3D storytelling, but that is not the only way to convey your message or get things across. We can tell a lot of stories with sound. So let's look a little bit with how code can actually compose sound. So, it's playing on my computer. I'll just turn it all the way up. Can everybody hear it? Okay, so how would you all describe what you just heard? I heard jazz, I heard lo-fi. Yeah, so that was actually music that was generatively, that's a hard word, coded with a tool called Strudel. And it basically allows you to live code music directly in the browser. I didn't create that. Music composition is not my forte. So I really leaned on the documentation there for some tools that were already done. I did Zelda's Lullaby, and that took me like an hour by itself. So I think that's basically my peak on that one. But there's so much that you can do with Strudel and with creating music. When I first heard this, I was genuinely blown away. I know that there's a lot that you can do in the browser with just like natural JavaScript and web audio, which is basically what this is naturally built off of. There's nothing super fancy, but Strudel allows you to compose patterns, to compose beats and rhythms and everything in real time, just like you saw when I hit play. you can see exactly when it's highlighted and it gets there, what's running, which I think is really cool. Oop, I keep doing that. So, is anybody in here really good at music or like music composition? Would yeah, okay. So you likely know a lot more about how music is composed and all of the different levels of music than I do. Really had to lean on my husband for this part. But from the breakdown that he gave me, a lot of it was the composition of the drums, which are giving a very structured beat that we heard earlier, which likely leads to the lo-fi or the jazz, or maybe the chords that are coming and providing like a nice harmonic rhythm. All of those make it feel grounded and feel human. This didn't feel super computery. And maybe if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that this was code that generated the music and not something else or like our live band. So what Strudel really does for us is it opens the gateway to generative music. And generative music is music that can change and evolve depending on whatever an input or environment is. So one of my favorite aspects of games is the score. I absolutely love listening to games and playing games that have good music because they have the ability to affect the pacing, the mood, the tone, how we interpret the game in a lot of our experience. So, in order to get the score, a lot of times composers used to have to create loop tracks and a lot of loop tracks to change depending on the different factors of the game, where you were, what the player should be experiencing at the moment. And what generative music does is it allows them to not have to do that. So with generative music and something called reactional, where we can see this being implemented in person, they actually allow composers to create one singular piece of music, and it can change depending on different micro or macro parameters. And I could talk about it, but I'm going to go ahead and play a little portion of this so you can actually see it. Oh, is it not? Uh, am I close? Oh, bottom left. Yeah, I'll just do that. Here. Or does anybody? Where's my cursor? Okay. That's easier. Okay. I'm sorry, y'all. Thanks for bearing with me. For you. Congestion ahead. Now playing cheerful music for you. And it's gonna speed and accelerate the beat of the music depending on how fast the car is going. That's what I wanted to show. Pedestrians ahead. Please drive slowly and carefully. What I was hoping to showcase was that things like this would have been very difficult previously with having to use separate loop tracks because there are so many variables that you have to keep track of in order to have an experience like that. So being able to use generative music, which is what Reactional is using, similar to Strudel, makes this exponentially easier. And it allows you to create different environment variables or different environmental factors and adjust the music that way. I love Odyssey. Yeah. One soundtrack of the year deserves it. It's good. Should not have done one game of the year over Zelda, but that's Breath of the Wild and Odyssey came out the same year. The Mario one. Mario one? Mario one? We can talk about that a little bit. But now that we're back on track. No, no, no. No, you're good. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So anyway, generative music, I love it. It's been something that has been very interesting to me, especially when we start thinking about the elephant in the room, which is AI. How do we continue to be creative coders, and how can we stay in the driver's seat of creation when AI is here and we know that it's not going anywhere? But let's be clear, before we go any further, AI is not going to replace us as creatives, and the question should not be, will AI replace us or our jobs? What we should be asking is, how can we use it to collaborate during the ideation process? How can we turn those really weird, I have this idea and I need to get it out fast to see if it works? How do we get there faster? How can we lower the barrier between execution and creativity? Because for some of us, I know for me, I have an idea, but I'm not always sure how to conceptualize it in words. How can I use AI to bridge that gap so that I can explain it to get there faster? The thing is, these tools generate. AI will generate what we tell it to generate. It does not feel, though. It does not imagine. Those are uniquely human traits. So it doesn't know if something looks good. It doesn't know if something looks elegant. It just knows I generated what you asked me to generate. So in that vein, we are still in control. We are still in the driver's seat. So how do you actually use AI tools, whether it be ChatGPT, Cursor, whatever your favorite coding IDE is, in the creativity process? For me, a lot of it is these three things. I do a lot of scaffolding. I will tell it to generate me a blank component, give it the parameters, the logic behind what I want it to do, and then I stay in the driver's seat when it comes to the actual creative part or styling. I ask it to, to generate assets. I don't love dealing with SVGs, but that it does pretty okay. So I do it for generating SVGs or some graphics that I might need for my site as well. And then I also tend to use it to make sure that what I'm creating is cute, but also accessible, because accessibility is not an option. If it's cute, but it's not accessible, it's not going to help anybody. So like I said, in my opinion, CSS, native CSS specifically, AI is not great at generating creative code for it yet. It'll do good with things like Tailwind. It'll do good if you have a design system or a component library. But in terms of creating things that just look good because they're creative, because you want them to look a certain way, we are still in full control. AI can suggest, and we are still going to be the people that shape and that style. But the key to having AI actually be our creative assistant is that communication. And creative coding is what is going to train us to be more curious about our explanations, more intentional with what we are trying to explain, and more clear with what the output that we want is going to be. So naturally, the more creative you are, the more you're going to be able to convey what doesn't exist yet. And that is really what's key when it comes to creativity. So are we going to be doing CSS art, pixels, generating generative music every single day? For most of us, the answer is no, not really. But that doesn't mean that a lot of the principles that we've discussed already won't still be able to help you and affect how you do code, because it really does change how we build, how we think, and how we code. So let's take some technical constraints. Let's say you have an API and maybe it's rate limited, it's not useful, or it really just isn't giving you the information that you want. The same instinct that says, how can I break this Nintendo Switch down into different pieces, is the same exact logic that you would use to say, okay, well, maybe I can cache this, or maybe I can paginate this, or maybe there's another API where I can stitch these pieces of data together in order to get what I want. It's going to make you start asking those questions more. Or maybe you're building for clients, and anybody who's done freelance work knows sometimes clients say what they want, but they don't actually know what they want. And what happens is you become an interpreter for what they say they want, for what they show they want, and for what you're going to build them, which is going to be what they want. You have to do a lot of inferring when it comes to dealing with like freelancing and things like that. And just like that, creative coding helps you with those interpretation and inference skills as well. And then the most fun part it's going to just naturally make you better at creating delightful experiences and delightful places on the web. Especially today when we are seeing a lot of AI generated sites, I think something that I'm noticing is a lot of them tend to look the same. They have the same layouts, they have the same colors, they have the same mood. And I don't want us as an industry to lose that spark of having those MySpace style websites where you go and you see a corner that is uniquely you or uniquely a specific brand. Now, we have gotten better at web design, so maybe we don't go back to the super ugly HTML, but we go to something that is still custom and still feels like you. So, how do you get back to those early days of coding for MySpace or Tumblr or whatever it was that originally gave you a lot of that dopamine? I think there's a couple ways to do it. The first one is to just create something. Add time to create into your normal development routine. Maybe you do something like trying to create your favorite emoji with just HTML and CSS. Or maybe you do something like recreating a component that you already currently use at work and maybe say, hey, I don't really like it right now how it is at work, but what if I made it my way? Or what if I made it actually delightful to use? Or maybe try adding some constraints onto your development and try adding little barriers for yourself to see, hey, if I say that I only have 30 minutes to do this, or I can only use this framework, or I can only use XYZ, how is it going to force me to think out of the box and what can I create with those constraints? The point is not perfection. The point is always going to be to play. Because when you play and you give yourself room to explore, that's really where you get to flex that creative muscle. So once you start doing that and you start noticing the possibilities around you and everything that you build, the question doesn't become how can I do it or can it be done? It becomes how do I want to do it and what way do I want to solve and tackle the problem? So yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much.